The following is based on a true story. The screw began to loosen in the ice. Alex watched helplessly as the crack began to grow and spread around the screw head, as though in slow motion. His entire body weight was attached to that screw, and there was nothing he could do. He only had time to look up at the top of the icy crevasse 30 feet above him and the sun high in the sky. That same sun whose rays had weakened the ice around him. With a pop followed by a sickening crunching sound, the ice came loose. The screw still stuck firmly inside it. Alex plummeted the 50-foot fall down to the bottom of the crevasse he'd just spent 5 hours climbing up from. There'd be nothing to slow his fall. Only death waited for him below. The morning hike had been tough, but worth it. Alex and David, college friends, who'd bonded over their shared love of ice and mountain climbing, had broken camp early to make the mountain's summit. This would give them ample time to make the descent and reach a safe camping spot before sundown. Critical because while the mountain was just around freezing in the daylight, at night it dropped to well below. If you hadn't made camp by the time dusk fell, you were in serious trouble. The view at the top was spectacular, amongst the best all along the Cascades, which stretched from Canada down to Northern California. The two friends had a quick snack at the top while enjoying the view. They could see down one side of the mountain to a team of mountaineers slowly heading their way. Every experienced mountaineer knows the climb down is often more treacherous than the ascent. The duo had chosen a well-traveled, reliable path down, hoping for a safe descent. This would place them opposite the team coming up, giving them a professional courtesy of enjoying their own climb in solitude. The day was warming up, with temperatures rising just above freezing. It was enough to cause a slight melt, causing some of the snow to glisten. It was beautiful and ethereal, an otherworldly sight. And it was a hint of hidden lethal danger. David led the way down the mountain. As the most experienced of the two, he was best suited to the task. He'd grown up climbing with his father, then at the age of 18 had tackled some of the tallest peaks in the United States and Canada solo. Now he worked as an instructor, but to Alex, climbing remained a hobby. He liked to joke that David had gone pro. Alex was content to stay in the bush leagues, preferring his day job. The pay was better after all. The melting snow intensified the glare, turning the mountainside into a blinding white. Both men squinted behind their sunglasses. The effect was disorienting, enough to make even an expert slip up just for a second. And the mountain punished even a small sin with all the fury of a vengeful god. It was one single step, just to the left of where David had been aiming for. A fateful 3 inches that spelled doom. His foot plunged through the snow. He knew he was in trouble. The snow seemed to open up, revealing a yawning black pit directly in front of him. David was helpless. He tumbled forward, throwing out his arms in desperation. Incredibly, he managed to grab onto the far ledge of the widening pit, finding purchase on solid rock just under the snow. But behind him, the chasm grew rapidly as the snow collapsed in on itself. A snowdrift had concealed the crevasse all winter, its thin layer of ice weakened by the freezing and thawing, supporting only a deceptive blanket of snow. It had been impossible to spot from above. The collapsing snow caught up to Alex, and in an instant he was helpless, flailing as he lost all footing. He fell backward, sliding uncontrollably down the steep embankment before plummeting over the edge. Below him was 80 feet of darkness, a void waiting to swallow him whole as he plunged into the abyss with an avalanche of snow. David's instincts kicked in. He was still roped to Alex, but he knew that he had no hope of supporting both their body weight with his precarious grip on the rocks. He was barely keeping himself from falling in. The rope connecting him to Alex was secured via a quick-release carabiner, designed for just such an emergency when tough choices had to be made. But David made a different choice. He couldn't stop Alex from falling, but maybe he could save his life. Reaching for his ice axe, David struck it deep into the ice next to him, digging in his crampons with the toes of his boots. Alex hit the end of the rope and jerked him violently downward. The ice axe and the crampons tore free and dragged David down the steep slide to the pit below. But David flipped himself around as he slid and dug the ice axe and crampons in again. The ice ripped apart as the two fell into the dark. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it was enough to slow their fall. Suddenly, there was no more ice. David slid straight off the ledge and into the dark. Alex landed with a heavy thud onto a deep pile of snow. David's heroic maneuver had saved his life, the snow falling ahead of Alex and creating a cushion on top of the hard ice below. He could feel his ribs aching badly, but nothing felt broken. Wait, he thought. David! First, have you ever had a brilliant idea for a video but felt stuck because you didn't know where to start? Meet InVideo AI V3, the tool that'll help you communicate your ideas irrespective of what skill level you're at. Unlike traditional tools that can feel overwhelming, InVideo AI puts you in the director's seat, making the entire video creation process seamless, while it does the heavy lifting. Just type in your idea, whether it's a recipe, a commercial, or even a trailer for a movie that doesn't exist, and watch as InVideo AI transforms it into a full-length video. With text-based commands, you can customize every detail. Want to add a voiceover or change the language? Just type it in. You can even clone your own voice for narration. The year was 1978. Ted Bundy had been terrorizing the nation for years. InVideo AI isn't just a tool, it's your creative partner, and you can try it right now for free, saving you hundreds of dollars on editing and stock footage. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description to bring your ideas to life with InVideo AI V3. David! Alex looked around desperately, grunting as he struggled to prop himself up despite the pain. There was only a weak groan in response. The light from above was just enough to illuminate the scene just a few feet away. With no one to control his own fall, David had been pushed further out into the crevasse, carried by his momentum like a kid on a slide. He landed with a sickening crunch straight into hard-packed ice. One of his legs was twisted unnaturally, and blood was already soaking through his snow jacket. "No, David!" Alex dug himself free, thrashing to release himself from the 6 feet of snowfall that had saved his own life. But then a menacing roar sounded from up above. Alex only had a brief moment to look up before being hit by a wall of white. He was alive. It felt like an elephant was sitting on his back, pressing his face and body down into the snow. He must have been knocked unconscious. He was face down, and that's what had saved his life. A small air pocket had formed around him, allowing him to breathe. Alex struggled, feeling the snow shift. Thank God. However much snow had fallen into the crevasse from above, it hadn't been enough to entomb him completely. Then an alarming thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. David! He strained and pushed up as hard as he could, his body screaming in agony. He ignored it though, struggling against 100 pounds of snowfall, trying his best to smother him. Shifting and squirming, he felt the load lighten on his back and realized he was doing it. He was worming his way free. With a gasping cry, Alex pulled himself free of the snow, grateful to breathe fresh air again. "David!" His cries echoed in the icy hole. He had no fear of a second avalanche, his thoughts consumed by the plight of his best friend. Plunging himself into the snowfall around him, he began to dig like a madman in the general area that he'd seen David before the collapse. His hand struck something hard and rubbery, a boot. Digging frantically, he found David's left foot. Then he worked feverishly to unearth him. He had an instinct to try to tug him free, but then he remembered the terrible injuries he'd seen right before the avalanche. He also remembered that David had landed on his back, face up toward the falling snow. No, David, hold on, buddy." Snow flew as he dug through 2 feet of it, clearing it away from David's body. After a minute, he finally unearthed David's face. His lips were purple, his eyes closed. David was unresponsive. Working a trembling hand free of his glove, Alex pressed his fingers against David's neck. No pulse. A choking sob broke free and Alex slumped, hiding his face with his hands. He pieced together the fall while frantically trying to dig David free. He knew David could have hit the quick release, could have saved his own life, but he hadn't. He dug his toes and axe in, trading his life for Alex's in the process. "I can't stay, buddy. God, I want to so bad. It should be me. It should be me staying here in this pit. But I can't stay. If I do, they'll never find either of us." Alex regloved his hand. Despite the crushing guilt, there was only one choice to make. If he stayed down here, then David's death would have been meaningless. The only way to honor David was to save his own life now, to make an impossible 80-foot climb to the top. "I promise, I'll bring people. We'll get you home, buddy." Alex placed his hand over David's face for a moment, whispering a quick prayer aloud. Tears stung his face as they fell down his cheeks. The climb up would not be an easy one. Impossible was more like it. In the fall, Alex's backpack had been torn free, its contents scattered as it hit the icy floor. Most of his gear had tumbled deeper down into the dark depths of the icy crevasse. David's gear hadn't fared much better, but Alex managed to salvage a length of rope and several ice screws, along with David's ice axe, the ice axe that had saved his life but cost David his own. One of his crampons had been torn loose, so he borrowed one from David. Taking stock of the situation, Alex knew that the odds were firmly against him. But he wouldn't let David's death be in vain. The ice axe bit deep into the icy wall. Alex grunted as he lifted himself up enough to drive an ice screw into it. He lost his threading tool in the fall, so he had to screw it in by hand. It was a slow process, and looking up at the 80 feet above his head, he tried to calculate how long the climb would take. It had been before noon when they fell. With some luck, he'd be out before nightfall. If he was stuck on the ice wall as the night chill came in, there was a little hope he'd survive. One screw at a time, Alex pulled himself inch by inch up the wall. He didn't have enough screws for the whole ascent, so after anchoring a few and securing himself to the rope, he had to climb back down to unscrew the ones below. This process was slow and grueling, made even worse by the pain his body was in from the fall. He was almost certain he had several bruised ribs or worse, a fracture, but pushing through the pain was his only option. Without the threading tool, his hands ached, but he ignored it. Instead, he replayed David's lessons over and over in his mind. Back from when ice screws had become more popular than traditional pitons. Remember, convex is bad, concave is good. Don't try to screw into convex ice that bulges out. Alex nodded as he worked a screw into the ice wall. Right, like that ice right there. That would have been a bad choice. That's right, Alex, and you know why? Yeah, David, once you put the leverage on the screw, the convex ice is going to pop loose. It's weaker than flat ice, but concave is the best. He could feel David grinning in his imagination. Good job, and the best angle is? Slightly upwards, even though it's counterintuitive. In his mind, David's specter nodded silently over his shoulder, as if watching Alex's every move. That part always scared you. Alex grunted, driving a new screw into the ice wall. A slight upwards angle like he'd been taught. Well, yeah, it looks like it'll pop out easier when you put your weight on it. Trust the physics, Alex. Alex grinned despite the pain. He had made it 40 feet, halfway up. Water dripped down onto him as the melt ran down the sides of the crevasse. He leaned up to drive his ice axe into the wall above him and felt a tug at his waist. The second rope, the one still attaching him to David's body below. He wasn't about to let it go. He needed a way to lift his body up once he was at the top. Never mind that if he made it up at all, he'd be at the edge of complete physical collapse and still needed to find help before nightfall. He tugged on the rope, freeing it from an icy outcropping, and turned his attention back to the climb. He shut off all other thinking, driving himself on like a robot. 4 screws up, then shimmy down the rope, attaching him to the topmost screws, and recover the ones he left behind. Rinse and repeat. Ignore the burning pain in his chest and the buildup of lactic acid in his muscles. There was no time to rest. But there was time for mistakes. He drove his next screw into the ice somewhere right up around his eye line and directly below his ice axe. It was a rookie mistake, one made by an exhausted mind. David had taught him better. Each screw should be driven in between the shoulder and hip height, well away from the ice axe. That way it didn't cause a fault in the ice around the axe itself. And this section of ice had had enough. With a creak, part of the wall suddenly collapsed. A crack ran up from the side of the screw to just above his axe. And in one large chunk, with his screw still stuck inside it, the wall gave out. Alex plunged downward as the expanding crack split through the ice, reaching his second screw. The shattering ice rang out like gunfire, echoing through the crevasse. The pressure of thousands of tons of mountain on the ice caused it to shatter, spitting the screw out like a bullet, narrowly missing Alex's head. Dozens of jagged ice shards, however, hit their mark, slashing his face and neck, while his helmet deflected the worst of the assault. With a sudden jerk, Alex hit the end of the slack rope, the air exploding out of his bruised lungs. He was swinging now over the void, rope attached to the very last screw, still embedded in the ice. The crack that had nearly been his doom stopped 7 inches short of it. Overcome, Alex let the emotion break through, sobbing in big, heaving breaths. Tears streamed down his cheeks, plunging 50 feet below into the abyss. Keep it together. That screw held. You're all right. David's voice was comforting. I can't. I'm so tired, David. I can't. I know you're tired. You can. I promise you can. With a wrenching sob, Alex pulled himself together. He reached out for the lifeline and heaved himself up. It was excruciating. His harness had helped distribute the force of the sudden stop at the end of the rope, but it had also compressed his wounded ribs. He was sure at least one was broken now, and it hurt to breathe. But he pushed the pain away, hauling himself up the rope until he could reach the screw that had saved his life. The other 2 screws dangled below him, the topmost one still embedded in a chunk of ice. Digging his crampons into the wall, he steadied himself with one hand on the screw. His ice axe was gone now, somewhere at the bottom of the crevasse. He'd have to climb using only screws now, something any experienced ice climber would be quick to tell you is nigh impossible. The only other choice was death. Freeing the lead screw from its chunk of ice, Alex drove it a foot above him into the ice. The break had revealed a smooth wall of solid ice that had probably not seen a melt in hundreds if not thousands of years. It was good climbing ice, a hidden blessing born out of a catastrophe. Screw by screw, foot by foot, the going was even slower without the ice axe. The sun had dipped below the rim above, casting long shadows, but the remaining light still offered a glimmer of hope. The screw bit shallowly into the ice, holding only a few centimeters at first. With steady, deliberate twists, Alex forced it deeper until it held firm. He dug his left crampon into the ice wall, then pushed up, his hand reaching up to feel the ice above. But instead of ice, he felt snow. Blinking in disbelief, Alex looked up. He'd been so focused on pushing through the searing pain that he'd fallen into a trance, climbing 20 feet purely on instinct. Now just above him, the rim of the crevasse came into view. Excitement coursed through his body, pushing the pain away. He pushed the snow aside frantically, fingers searching for anything solid, an ice chunk, a rock, a rough edge, anything to hold on to. His hand moved in quick, sweeping motions, feeling only cold, soft snow. As he hung onto the edge of the crevasse that had killed his friend and nearly killed him twice, Alex's heart sank. Without his ice axe, there was no way to get a good purchase to haul himself up. He was going to die there, just inches from safety. Or he could take a risk. Right now, he was secured to 3 screws driving into the ice. He could remove 2, try to drive them into the ice up above the rim and haul himself up that way. It was risky, but he was already shimmying down the rope to undo the bottommost screw. All climbers knew that the ice at the very top of a crevasse is the weakest and most prone to cracking. It's young ice, often in a state of constant melt and refreezing, which causes all kinds of structural cracks. The lone screw driven in at chest level seemed to be holding his weight. But what would happen if he slipped trying to climb up and fell again? He had little confidence that the ice would hold, but if he didn't risk it, he would die here. There was no choice. With a grunting heave, Alex thrust one hand over the lip, fingers blindly clawing through the snow. He fumbled to angle the screw in his other hand, all while clinging to the lone screw on the ice wall. He couldn't see the ice he was screwing into. If it was concave or faulty, it would cost him his life. He felt the area around best he could, but his limbs were numb from exertion and cold. It was a blind guess, but the best he had. The screw took all of his effort to secure, the awkward angle draining what little strength he had left. He gave it a tug. It held firm. Soon he put his entire body weight on it, but for now, he took a brief pause. He couldn't wait long though, not with the sun somewhere on the horizon. He smashed his left foot into the ice wall, taking a big step up and burying the crampons deep. With a groaning yell, he hauled himself upward, placing his life in the hands of a single screw. It held. Tears ran down his cheeks again. It was sheer physical exertion. He pushed up against the ice with all of the strength in his legs, pulled up with his arms. Even with an ice axe, this was the hardest part for a climber exiting a crevasse. His arms burned and started to shake uncontrollably. Soon, he'd have no strength left and no energy to try again. He never knew if he imagined it or something else was at work, but he felt like David was giving him a slight push up, barely perceptible, maybe the product of a grief-stricken and exhausted mind. But it was all he needed. With a yell, he lifted himself up and rolled over the edge. A 7-hour climb was over. He lay crying tears of joy and grief. On the horizon, the sun was low but still an hour or so from setting. He couldn't rest, not now, and he hurried to remove his climbing gear. There were constant forest ranger patrols along this route of the mountain during the climbing season. If he was loud, somebody would surely hear him. On this side of the mountain, the tree cover was sparse, and his voice would carry far. Plus, he'd be easily visible. He undid the long rope still attached at his waist, still connecting him to David's corpse below. Attaching it to the ice screw, Alex thanked his friend. "I wouldn't have made it without you, bud. Thank you. Thank you for everything." What would you have done if you were in Alex's situation? Would you push through it or wait it out? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out I Was Trapped Underwater for 3 Days, or click this other video instead.